The subcommittee will come to order. This morning we examined the status of the digital television transition since the passage of legislation postponing the final date for analog signal termination from February 17 until June 12. Much has occurred since that measure became law. Under the thoughtful leadership of Acting Assistant Secretary for Communications and Information, Ana Gomez, the waiting list for coupons, a major factor in our decision to postpone the transition, has been cleared, and that truly is a major accomplishment. Coupons are now being sent to applicants by first-class mail, so households will receive them more quickly. NTIA has changed its guidelines and now allows households whose previously issued coupons had expired to reapply for coupons, and many households are now doing so. The FCC has bolstered its call centers, which at the time we postponed the transition were, due to inadequate resources, in total disarray. And the results of this progress are clear. When we postponed the transition, according to the Nielsen service, 6.5 million homes were totally unprepared for the transition and would have lost all television service had the transition taken place as originally scheduled on February the 17th. That 6.5 million homes represented fully 5.7% of all television viewing households across the United States. Today, 4.1 million households remain unprepared, a number that is 3.6% of the television viewing public. That is a major improvement, but much remains to be done to enable the preparation of those homes that remain unprepared as of the present time. Congratulations are due to Ms. Gomez and to Acting FCC Chairman Michael Copps for their stewardship of the transition at a truly difficult and challenging time. And I can say this morning that I truly appreciate the work of both of these outstanding public servants. But challenges do lie ahead, and today's hearing has as its purpose achieving a full understanding of those challenges and the best means by which we collectively can address them. These questions, I think, need answers. Will we have enough converter boxes to meet the demand prior to June the 12th? I personally have some serious concerns about whether a sufficient number of converter boxes will be available in order to meet the demand under our current forecasts. Could there be a spike in demand in the weeks prior to June the 12th, similar to what was experienced during December of last year and the early weeks of January this year? And if it is reasonable to anticipate a spike in demand, are we prepared for it? Will NTIA have the mechanisms in place in order to meet that kind of elevated demand? And what steps are being taken to make technical assistance available to homes in low-income and rural areas of the nation where technical help typically is not readily available? Today's hearing will examine these and other future needs as we prepare for the June 12 transition date. I want to thank our witnesses for their participation this morning and welcome each of them. And at this time, I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a case where the glass is half empty or half full. In this case, the glass is 95% full, and we perhaps have a different view of this. We opposed delaying the transition to June 12th from February 17th. We thought it was unnecessary since 95% of the television homes were ready for the transition on February 1st, with 2 weeks still to go. And of the roughly 6 million households that were still unprepared, just under 3 million were holding coupons that simply could have been used on February 17th. To help the remaining 3 million homes that were still unprepared and didn't have coupons, Mr. Barton and I, the ranking member, and I advocated authorizing an additional $250 million in early January. The NTIA said that they would have allowed it to clear the waiting list in time to continue with the transition. We even would have gotten most of the money back at the end of the unused coupons. We certainly had enough time to do so in light of the fact that the Delay Act was passed only 5 business days after its January 29th introduction. It appears we were right that there was no need to delay. Despite significant arm twisting, 1/3 of the nation's 1,800 full power stations simply transitioned by February 17th. Anyway, the sky did not fall. The fear that consumers would overwhelm the system with frantic telephone calls was simply unfounded. The FCC received less than 20,000 calls a day from February 13th to the 19th, well within its capacity, and many of the calls were just about how to set up the converter box, which were often just simply resolved over the phone. All total, half the nation's full power stations, covering 193 of the country's 210 television stations, will transition before the June 12th date. But Congress did not delay, which decided to spend $650 million for the transition, which simply put is a waste of money and hurting the credibility of the federal government. That money did not become available until March 2nd. Yet between February 1st and March 1st, even before a single coupon was issued with the additional funds, 1.4 million more households simply became ready, with the number of prepared households climbing to 96%. Of the 4.4 million households that still needed to take action to continue receiving television service, approximately 2 million were holding at least one active coupon. This means we allocated about $270 for each of the 2.4 million unprepared homes without a coupon, even though a converter box simply cost under $50. The fact that the money was not available until March 2nd is also why it took until just this week to clear the waiting list, which continued to grow all this time. Now, that's the unfortunate history. Now we must try to limit the harm. We could do so by dedicating $350 million of the funds for exclusively over-the-air homes, which would pay for 2 redeemed coupons for each of the 3.6% of homes as of March 15th that are exclusively over-the-air and still unprepared. Since it was concerned over such homes that supposedly justified this delay, that's where we should focus our attention. Otherwise, all this headache and all this expense will have been for nothing. If we do focus on over-the-air homes rather than paid television homes that are not in jeopardy of losing service, we may get back more than $500 million from both the initial and the stimulus money once the transition is completed. That's because the initial funding covering 33.5 million redeemed coupons, only 26 million have been redeemed as of March 18th. By contrast, if we continue to spend as much or more money on paid television homes as over-the-air homes, the administration may find it has not made a significant dent in the 4 million remaining unprepared homes. Let's not forget that there are more than 6 times as many paid television homes than over-the-air homes. In closing, Mr. Chairman, from February 15th to March 15th, we went from 4.4% of all households unprepared to 3.6%. That's an improvement of only 0.8 percentage points. Let's make sure that that's not all we get for the $650 million. Our consumer confusion, our headaches. Please work with us to ensure that the NTIA and the FCC spends money on over-the-air homes and saves the rest for something more important. We may not agree on what that important thing is, but I'm sure we can find something better to spend the money on these days than converter boxes for the vast majority of homes that are already prepared for the transition. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stearns. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, former chairman of this subcommittee, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much, and I want to commend you for holding this hearing on the digital television transition and for assembling an excellent panel of witnesses to testify this morning. As you know, Mr. Chairman, this subcommittee conducted 6 oversight hearings in the last Congress and received 3 GAO reports at my request on the digital TV transition. We tried very hard to keep people's feet to the fire and to try to make the original date work. Now that Congress has moved the date back to June 12th, it is important that we wisely use the additional time and the additional resources to maximize consumer education and outreach, and to ensure that the least amount of disruption is caused to consumers during this transition. I want to commend Acting FCC Chairman Copps for the alacrity with which he has taken on the task of being our nation's quarterback on the transition. I also want to salute his emphasis on the coordination he has effectuated with his FCC colleagues, with the NTIA, as well as with consumer groups and with the television industry. I think his testimony is an eye-watering dissection of what went wrong, but also a pathway to ensure that all will go right on June 12th. I also want to commend Acting Assistant Secretary Gomez of the NTIA for the diligent work she has performed, along with IBM, to eradicate the backlog of 4 million coupons that were on the waiting list. Obviously, much still needs to be done to ensure success, and I believe the testimony from the FCC and NTIA today provide a sound blueprint for moving forward. While we have many broadcasters already ceasing analog transmissions in many smaller markets, we still have the largest stations in the largest markets looming for a flash cutoff on June 12th. It is important to execute this well. I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, and with Chairman Waxman, Ranking Members Barton and Stearns, to ensure that we meet this date and that the American public feels that the government did its job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Markey. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, is recognized for 2 minutes.
I'm going to defer.
The gentleman from Michigan defers his opening statement and will have 2 minutes added to his questioning time for the first panel of witnesses. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For over 50 years, we've had April 15th as the tax filing day, and it's coming upon us. And again, this year, we'll have millions of people who will not file on time. And that'll be true come June 12th. And that was true in February. And as much government money and advertisement as we want to throw at it will not change that fact. Let's see. We have, by this Congress and this administration, a carbon tax that will destroy the economy. We have a plan for a one-payer health care system that will ration health care for all. We have a reckless spending agenda that will bankrupt this country. But what we could do in this debate, in this hearing, Mr. Chairman, is find out how we can save $600 million. Now, I know in this Congress that's not a lot of money, but for most Americans it is, and that's what I hope we address in this hearing and these questions. I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shimkus, for your normal moderate statement. He and I are friends. He knows I can say that and get away with it. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Space, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to come together today to discuss the progress made toward this nation's full conversion to digital television. It's very clear to me that this process has not been an easy one. Rather, our shift from analog to digital has involved a significant amount of time, energy, resources, and creativity. And further, such efforts are ongoing, necessarily providing support for months to come. Whether one favored the delay or not, I think most will agree that because of the phased approach we find ourselves in now, we've learned some very good lessons that continue to enable us to adjust and improve consumer outreach and education. The NTIA, the FCC, our broadcasters, cable providers, retailers, suppliers, service groups, public entities, local officials have all truly joined forces in an effort to shepherd the transition through to completion. In Ohio's 18th District, WOSU, the PBS station out of Columbus, Ohio, has done some very good work in preparing our communities. Through an FCC contract, WOSU has been able to provide DTV outreach through walk-in centers, a call center, and installation assistance, and numerous public events. They partnered with Life Care Alliance and the Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging to reach thousands of the estimated 100,000 over-the-air households in Ohio, many of which are senior citizens. WOSU's DTV coupon donation program received national recognition from PBS and served as a model for other communities across the country. I understand that there is much more to be done, but I believe WOSU's case serves as an example of how members in a community can work together to ensure that all citizens have the information they need to prepare for the last phases of the digital transition. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for calling attention to this issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Space. The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing, and I appreciate our witnesses being here to help us through and inform us of the current status. And as probably many in this committee know, I was vocally opposed to the delay, knowing that there's always going to be a certain percentage of people that are never ready. And we can't just delay something because people didn't get ready or we didn't get to 100%. Now, one TV station in my market still held with the February date, and that's WWT. It's interesting on the transition date how few calls they received. Many of us were prepared for an onslaught of thousands, and it turned out to be a few hundred. They had phone banks ready, United Way, 211, and we just didn't see the level of activity. And most of the complaints that were coming in, they needed help with the scan. 33 inquiries on that date were about how to get a coupon, that they did not have a coupon. Now, out of a DMA of 412,000 people, and 33 of the inquiries were, how do I get a coupon now since we just lost Channel 6, is a very tiny percentage, and that's 8/1000ths of 1%. So I appreciate the boldness of WWT Channel 6 for going forward, because I'm now convinced on June 12th, the calls will probably be in the dozens and not the hundreds. And there's probably very few out there that are left that aren't prepared. So I wanted to thank them publicly, and in fact, Mr. Prather is from Gray TV, the owner of the TV station, is here on the next panel, and I welcome you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terry. The gentleman from California, Mr. McNeary, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to waive my opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. McNeary. I see that the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell, Chairman Emeritus of our committee, has joined us, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, you are most kind and courteous, and I thank you. I commend you for the initiative that you are showing in making certain that the DTV transition is subject to adequate oversight and is properly conducted. As we are all painfully aware, the DTV transition has been fraught with great difficulty since it was mandated in 2005. In particular, grave errors by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, and the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, during the previous administration in their management of the DTV converter box coupon program and consumer education efforts were in large part to blame for the Congress's passage of legislation to postpone the DTV transition date. As I support no further postponement of this deadline, I look forward to cooperating with you, Mr. Chairman, in robust oversight of the programs associated with DTV. And I would urge you to continue your vigorous efforts in this matter, because I have great fears that the transition will be successful unless it is watched very closely and to see to it that it works in a way which is going to create minimal inconvenience to the nation's consumers. During numerous hearings in the 110th Congress, I asked representatives of NTIA whether they had sufficient funding for the converter box program. Despite a report in 2008 by the Government Accountability Office that NTIA would be unprepared to cope with a surge in consumer demand for converter coupons, NTIA consistently stated that it had adequate funding with which to meet consumer demand for these coupons, and to see to it that and assured us that the coupons were both sufficient in number and being properly handled. This, as we recently have learned, was patently false. And I think we have to get NTIA's commitment today that it will be forthright and cooperative with the Congress in making certain that the converter box program is properly administered with a view towards providing coupons to every consumer who applies for them, and to assure that the conduct of the program is done well, expeditiously, and that we don't have to contemplate the extension again of a program that has already gone on over long. Similarly, I look forward to a frank discussion with the FCC about the role that it plays in consumer education and outreach about the DTV transition. Prior attempts at these vital activities were disastrously mismanaged and proven to be largely ineffectual, something that we must strive to avoid at all costs in moving forward. Also, because of the DTV Delay Act extending FCC's authority to auction spectrum, we must ask frank questions about the agency plan for preventing waste, fraud, and abuse in these auctions, which have, to my experience, rarely been well conducted. I hope to have a productive conversation with our other witnesses about several additional issues related to this matter, including ongoing concerns of many people about DTV's transition effect on low-income persons, minorities, and elderly populations, and the financial capacity of public television broadcasters to cope with the transition, and the adequacy and availability of the supply of computer boxes to meet the consumer demand. Again, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your enlightened interest in seeing to it that the nation's transition to digital television is properly conducted and does not cause vast inconvenience to the people we serve. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Chairman Dingell, for those remarks. The gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to Mr. Copps, and I want to welcome Ms. Gomez. I think this is your first appearance with us, so we welcome you. And thank you for the hearing, sir. I appreciate that. Fortunately for consumers and members of the subcommittee, the world didn't come to an end on February 17th when stations began transitioning to an all-digital signal. In the 7th District alone in Tennessee, my congressional district, 8 full-power broadcast stations have already made a full digital transition in advance of the June deadline, and 3 more are slated to make that move by May 1st. This parallels national trends where roughly 1/3 of full-power broadcast affiliates have already made the switch. Federal and private sector officials report minimal customer disturbance. That's a good thing. In short, this is working. This is no doubt a product of a vigorous public-private partnership invested in an unprecedented public education campaign funded in large part by our nation's broadcasters and cable television providers. In the intervening period between passage of the DTV Delay Act and the committee's proceedings today, the NTIA is now current in distributing converter box coupons. The much ballyhooed 2 million customer waiting list is cleared, and NTIA claims to be processing new requests in less than 2 weeks per requesting consumer. This is certainly positive, and I congratulate the agency for its diligent work. The question we must ask, while Congress considers a budget resolution that will increase federal spending to 28.5% of our nation's GDP Is it what cost? The DTV Delay Act and companion funding from H.R. 1 unleashed the federal floodgates to the tune of $650 million to aid a transition that was already running smoothly. And I realize that in D.C. that's not a lot of money, but where I come from, it is. And I believe that money must be recouped, if possible, on behalf of the American taxpayer when the DTV transition is complete. As I stated during consideration of the DTV Delay Act, Congress's priority must be to ensure connectivity for exclusively over-the-air homes remaining from the overall group of 4.1 million unprepared households. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Blackburn. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses. At the outset of the Obama administration, they learned that the switch to DTV had been badly mismanaged. Millions of Americans who had applied for converter coupons languished on waiting lists while the February deadline approached. Consumer education programs have been successful, but over 6 million households were completely unprepared. The affected households tended to be disadvantaged, with the elderly and non-English speakers particularly hard hit. Worse, progress in standing up call centers to deal with the inevitable confusion of transition day was almost non-existent. In short, millions of televisions were on a trajectory to go dark on February 17th without adequate resources to help them navigate the transition. Congress was forced into a difficult decision to delay the transition until June. Since then, everyone has made significant progress in reaching households and helping them prepare. Since the passage of the DTV delay, 2.4 million digital converter coupons have been redeemed. Replacement coupons have been sent. Households that inadvertently allowed their coupons to expire, to households that had where their coupons had expired. Even better, first-class mail rather than the bulk rate was employed to avoid further delays. Call centers are going up, and the number of bilingual operators has increased so that all Americans are able to get help with the transition if they need it. I encourage everyone to continue to work diligently to ensure that the DTV transition in June goes smoothly and that the most vulnerable Americans are not left behind. I'm confident that we can do this, and I look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Castor. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Weiner, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. If anyone doubts the power of congressional oversight, I would note that in preparation for today's hearing on Tuesday alone, 91,000 people requested coupons, and last week, I guess in anticipation of your tough questions, 1.6 million, if I'm reading this right, coupons were issued with more than just about any other month in recent months. Look, I acknowledge what our colleague from Illinois points out, that there are a lot of people who were left out in the cold, and maybe the solution was to just turn off their television coverage, which would have been the result of the transition when it was originally scheduled. As with so many things this Congress is endeavoring to do, we are mopping up for the last administration. We're going to be doing that a lot. We're going to be taking mistakes that were made and trying to fix them. But I don't know who we would have punished by saying, okay, tough tacos, you're going to lose your service. And I think Congress was not prepared to do that. There were a lot of mistakes that were made, but I hope we also use this opportunity to take advantage of the glitch. Mr. Copps points out in his testimony something that others have observed, that having this as a staged transition might have been the better way to go originally. You know, doing it what other nations have done to give an opportunity to learn stage by stage. Maybe we can take this window of time that has been presented by some transitioning going on to learn some of the lessons. I think there was some wisdom in arguing to do that at the outset, and maybe if we use this opportunity, we do what our friend Rahm Emanuel refers to, not letting any crisis go to waste. Maybe this is also an opportunity for us to learn, and I appreciate the chairman holding this hearing to permit us to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weiner. The gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee, who has since departed. The gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Pierluisi, not a member of the Commerce Committee, has been welcomed to our hearing today, and I'm pleased to now recognize him for 2 minutes.
Chairman Boucher, Ranking Member Stearns, members of the subcommittee, thank you for providing me with the opportunity to speak today. I asked to participate in this hearing because I think it is appropriate for the record to reflect that the DTV transition has been especially problematic for the many of the 4 million U.S. citizens I represent. Now that the transition date has been extended until June, it is my hope that the deficiencies in planning that gave rise to these problems can be addressed. I know that today's oversight hearing reflects your determination, Mr. Chairman, to make certain that recent history does not repeat itself. I want to emphasize at the outset that the problems experienced in Puerto Rico to date did not result from lack of awareness on the island about the transition. Community and media organizations serving Puerto Rico, working in conjunction with the Commerce Department, did a terrific job of informing consumers about the steps that they needed to take in order to avoid a loss of service. I think this stands in contrast to certain jurisdictions in the states where outreach efforts were less successful. In a somewhat ironic twist, however, residents of Puerto Rico encountered problems precisely because they heeded this guidance too well. Upon being advised of the impending transition, my constituents did not hesitate. They applied for coupons quickly and in droves. The sheer number of coupon requests made from households in Puerto Rico should not have come as a surprise. It is common knowledge that Puerto Rico, relative to the states, has a large percentage of residents that rely on analog TVs. Although Puerto Rico ranks about 25th in total population size among U.S. jurisdictions, island residents have sought more coupons than all but 7 states. As of March 17th, about 2.1 million coupons had been requested by the island. This is about 80% of the amount requested by New York, a state with 5 times our population. And it is roughly 3 times the amount requested by Kentucky or Oregon, which have comparable population sizes. For some island residents who requested these coupons, the system worked as designed. They received a coupon, went to a participating island retailer, and used the coupon to offset the cost of the converter box. But for far too many of my constituents, the process did not proceed as planned. As in the States, some households in Puerto Rico requested coupons but were placed on a waiting list because demand exceeded supply. Other households obtained a coupon but found their local retailers no longer had boxes in stock and therefore had to wait. While they waited, their 90-day coupon expired. Based on intuition and some anecdotal evidence, I think this scenario may have been more common in Puerto Rico than in any other jurisdictions. In an August 2008 letter sent in response to Puerto Rico's request that coupons be reissued to individuals whose coupons had expired, the Secretary of Commerce...
Let me ask the gentleman if he could wrap up. He's well a minute beyond his time at this point.
Okay, I will wrap it up.
Thank you.
Noted that the law did not prohibit an individual whose coupon had expired from obtaining for free an unexpired coupon from a generous friend or family member. Frankly, that was a way to go, but it didn't help. My purpose today is not to cast blame, because that is not constructive, and because there is probably enough to go around. I want to look forward, not back, and to make sure that we do what is necessary before June to make this transition as seamless as possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pierre-Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee, is recognized for 2 minutes.
I'll wait, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Inslee. We now turn to our first panel of witnesses, and I am pleased, I'm sorry, were you? I'm sorry, Mr.
Mr. Chairman,
Blunt.
I don't want to slow up the panel, and I'll
I didn't see you arrive. Mr. Blunt, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will submit a statement for the record. I'm pleased you're having this hearing. Certainly in my congressional district, I think all of our transition will be done by the middle of April. One of our stations already made their transition by themselves on February the 17th. I think they were convinced that their analog equipment might not last much longer than that. And I'm going to be interested to see how this scattershot transition that we're now in occurs around the country. But I'm anxious to hear the witnesses. I'm glad you had the hearing, and I'll submit a statement for the record.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blunt. We now welcome our first panel of witnesses, and we are honored to have with us this morning the Acting Chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Mr. Michael Copps, a longstanding member of the Commission, and also the Acting Assistant Secretary for Communications and Information at the Department of Commerce, Ms. Ana Gomez. And without objection, your prepared written statements will be made part of the record. We would welcome your oral summaries. Please keep those to approximately 5 minutes so that we have ample time for questions. And Mr. Copps, we'll be pleased to begin with you.
Good morning, Chairman Boucher, Ranking Member Stearns.
And just a little technical matter for the Chairman of the FCC. Could you turn your microphone on, please? Thank you.
I don't know if it'll pull any further. Okay. Thank you very much. I have a fuller statement that I request be included in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you for inviting me this morning. Priority number one for me since my appointment as acting chair 2 months ago has been to shepherd the DTV transition to smoother pastures. We strive each day to carry out the provisions of the Delay Act in such a way as to ease the transition for millions of anxious viewers while at the same time providing legislatively mandated flexibility and balance for our TV stations. We had no detailed roadmap for this, but we had and have the commitment to get this job done better than it was getting done. Every day my FCC team and I are alive to achieving a successful, balanced outcome. Some may think we have erred too much one way. Others may say the other. At the end of the day, maybe all I can ask is for what Harry Truman once said should be his epitaph: we're trying our damnedest. It was clear to me long before I became acting chair and had a chance to look under the hood that the country was not ready for a nationwide transition on February 17th, not with a coupon program out of money and a long waiting list, not with rampant consumer confusion that I saw everywhere I traveled, not absent provisions for hands-on community assistance, particularly for the most vulnerable of our populations. There was no coordinated plan, no one making sure that the private and public sectors had every opportunity to combine their assets and get this job done that neither of us could do alone, but that working together we might just have a shot at, even at this late date. Thank you for the Delay Act. It clearly recognized that consumers were not ready for February 17th, and it gave them a few extra months to prepare. The act made it possible to avoid a consumer backlash of high order in February. But we are nowhere near out of the woods. Little more than a third of our full-power commercial stations have transitioned, and at this point only 2.5% of households are in markets that have completely transitioned to digital. So I'm happy to look back today, but this is a story whose main chapters remain to be written. Now, some may say that we won't be ready on June 12th either, and that there will still be consumers left behind. And it's true, this transition will not be seamless. You can count on some level of confusion, that level being determined by how well we do our job between now and June 12th. There is time to make a real difference. Here is some of what we're doing at the FCC to learn from the past and make that difference. We are focusing day and night on consumer education. We're repackaging our messages and adding vital new components to them. Starting April 1, for example, stations must notify their viewers about specific areas that may lose signal coverage no matter what consumers do, about the possible need for new antennas and the need to rescan. Stations also must publicize the location and operating hours of walk-in help centers and telephone contact information for the station and the call center. We are going to do everything we can to put boots on the ground. One lesson we've learned is the urgent need for hands-on assistance, including walk-in help centers and in-home assistance for consumers who need it. And there are lots of them. Seniors, folks with disabilities, citizens for whom English is not the primary tongue. So we are finalizing agreements with AmeriCorps and firefighters to provide outreach and in-home assistance to consumers across the country, and we will be soliciting bids from other organizations. While we will be serving all markets, we will put special focus working with NTIA on a target list of 49 hotspots that are particularly risky. And we will deploy a viable call center system to respond to calls for help. We've been working closely with our industry partners to establish a single nationwide number for consumers to call. Our cable and broadcast industries really stepped up to the plate on this. With a few months to go, we can now take it to the next level to provide more in-depth training for agents to handle longer and more technical calls and to improve the tools available to them for handling problems and referring consumers to help centers and other resources. There's another problem I have briefly to mention: signal coverage. For all of its bounty, the digital signal propagates differently than analog. Stronger in some places, it's weaker in others. For 2 years, I pressed without much success for more studies and analysis of these differences, because in some cases, viewers are not going to receive these signals, even if they have their boxes and their antennas hooked up. We're trying to deal with this, but even with the things we can begin to do, like distributed transmission systems and fill-in translators, solutions are not going to be everywhere in place by June. I believe consumers have a right to know this, and that's why we are requiring stations to notify viewers of coverage problems. And it's why we launched a new tool on our website where consumers can type in their home addresses and find out what stations they should be able to receive and what kind of antennas they might need to receive them. Before I close, I would like to recognize the efforts and sacrifices of our FCC team, as fine a group of public servants as I have encountered in my years in Washington. I thank my two friends and colleagues, Commissioners Jonathan Adelstein and Rob McDowell, for their tireless outreach and the leadership they and their staffs provide. I thank Assistant Secretary Gomez and her talented team at NTIA for bringing a real sense of urgency to our new level of interagency cooperation. Huge thanks go to industry, broadcast, cable, satellite, consumer electronics, retailers, and others. We have a real partnership with them now, like I've been pushing for years. I thank all the consumer civil rights, religious, and public interest groups who work so valiantly in behalf of the citizens of this great country. And a final thanks to so many everyday citizens across this land who reach out to help a friend, a relative, or a neighbor. Tip O'Neill once said that all politics is local. Well, the DTV transition is local too. In fact, it's downright personal, and it will require that personal touch if we are to succeed. Working together, we can and we will make a huge difference for consumers. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I would be happy to hear your comments, suggestions, and try to respond to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Chairman Copps. Ms. Gomez. And you might pull that microphone a bit closer. We can hear you better.
There. Thank you, Chairman Boucher, Ranking Member Stearns, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for your invitation to testify this morning on the DTV transition and the TV Converter Box Coupon Program. I am Anna Gomez, and I serve as the Acting Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communication and Information. To date, the coupon program has distributed 52.7 million coupons to more than 29 million U.S. households. Of these, consumers have redeemed nearly 26 million coupons at participating retailers for digital to analog converter boxes, and will likely have many more requests for coupons before the program concludes. As you all are aware, the DTV transition and the coupon program were in a crisis situation at the beginning of this year, when we hit our coupon funding limit and were forced to create a waiting list for millions of coupon requests. We have made much progress since then, but we still have much work to do. From my first day at NTIA last month, I've made it a top priority to minimize the number of people who could lose over-the-air TV as a result of the analog shutoff. Thanks to the foresight and leadership of the President and Congress, with the passage of the Delay Act last month, millions more people will have the opportunity to get prepared for the transition and to take advantage of the coupon program. In addition to extending the transition date, the Delay Act extended the deadline for coupon applications to July 31, authorized us to reissue coupons to consumers whose coupons expired without being redeemed, and provided us with flexibility to deliver coupons by faster means. The Recovery Act provided $650 million in funding to implement these new improvements. Of that, at least $490 million will be used for the distribution of at least an additional 12.25 million coupons. Up to $90 million will be available for consumer education and technical assistance, and $70 million will cover the cost of distribution and other administrative expenses. We appreciate the flexibility Congress provided by permitting NTIA to increase the allocation for coupons and to prioritize coupon distribution to consumers totally reliant on over-the-air broadcast service if necessary. This flexibility will enable us to adjust quickly to meet the needs of this unprecedented effort. We also moved swiftly to make related modifications and improvements to our operational systems. In addition, we are now distributing all coupons using first-class mail. All these actions are expected to reduce delivery time for coupons from 21 to 9 business days, approximately. Most importantly, I am pleased to report that 5 days ago, the coupon program was able to eliminate entirely the waiting list for coupons. We are again able to fulfill coupon requests as they are received and approved. As important as these additional coupons and process improvements are to the success of the digital transition, our education and outreach efforts are just as vital. We are tailoring these efforts to educate people of the various ways to become ready now for the digital transition, be it by obtaining a converter box with or without a coupon, by buying a digital television, or by subscribing to a pay television service. We want to do everything we can to ensure that those who need help can get it. We are also making improvements to our outreach efforts based on lessons we have learned. For example, beginning last month, the FCC, NTIA, and the White House significantly ramped up our coordination and accelerated efforts to ensure consumers have the information and assistance they need. We are also redoubling our efforts with the public-private partnerships that have already helped millions of households prepare for the DTV transition. Our nonprofit partners, for example, have served a vital feet-on-the-ground function to help inform the public of the new transition deadline and to assist those who still need to prepare. I would especially like to recognize the efforts of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights Education Foundation and the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging, or N4A, who receive NTIA grants to provide outreach and assistance to targeted populations. Thanks to the additional funds provided by Congress, NTIA grants to both of these organizations will be extended through the summer, allowing them to continue their outstanding efforts to help people prepare. We also have learned that more outreach to vulnerable populations is needed, along with new and creative approaches to reach these consumers. We are therefore recalibrating our messaging and outreach activities and undertaking various public education activities to respond to our current challenges. For example, in addition to running paid ad and public service advertising through radio and print outlets and on transit systems and bus shelters in key markets, we are developing new training modules that can be used by our partners, grantees, and others to ensure consistency and accuracy of our messaging. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, let me thank you again for extending the transition deadline and providing NTIA with critically needed funding for additional coupons and consumer outreach. Thanks also to Chairman Copps, Commissioners Adelstein and McDowell, and the NTIA and FCC staff for their ongoing commitment to a successful DTV transition and for working with us to maximize our effectiveness. Finally, I'd also like to note that Commerce Secretary Locke is fully committed to ensuring the success of the DTV transition and is already focused on the clarity and quality of our consumer education efforts. With all of us working together, we can usher in a successful end to the DTV transition. And I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Gomez. Chairman Copps, we appreciate your testimony this morning, and congratulations to both of you on a job well done in managing this transition through a very difficult period. Ms. Gomez, as I suggested in my opening statement, I'm concerned about whether or not there are going to be enough converter boxes available to meet the demand that will arise between the present time and June the 12th. And I make reference to the document which your office prepared with data as of 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon that indicates that there are currently about 9.2 million, almost 9.3 million active coupons in circulation. These are coupons that you have issued that have been mailed that as of this moment have not been redeemed. And I understand that the current redemption rate for coupons is approximately 60%. Is that correct?
That's right.
And so if you just do the simple math, 60% of 9.2 million would be 5.5 million converter boxes that we could expect to be claimed based upon redemptions of the coupons currently in circulation. And that number does not take into account the purchase of converter boxes without coupon support, some amount of which happens. And it certainly doesn't take into account the new demand for converter boxes that will arise based on coupons issued from this day forward between now and June the 12th. And so we can reasonably estimate that the demand for converter boxes is going to be well beyond this 5.5 million converter box number. And that's the number we know as of today based on the current redemption rate just on coupons already issued. The Consumer Electronics Association will testify later this morning that they anticipate only about 4.2 million converter boxes being needed all the way to June the 12th. And just based on the math I've done here and reported, that seems to me to be a very low number. So my question to you is, do you share that concern? And do you have any information that can enlighten us about the total projection of converter boxes that may be needed up until June 12?
Yes, actually, I do share that concern. About whether inventory...
Is your microphone on, Ms. Gomez? If not, pull it.
I do share that concern.
All right, good.
Sorry. About whether inventory levels will be sufficient to get us through the end of not just June 12th, but the demand that will also follow beyond June 12th. Up to now, the inventory levels have been good, and we have terrific retailers that voluntarily participate in our program. In order to be able to participate in our program, they do have to follow some rules, and our rules require those participating retailers to maintain inventory at commercially reasonable levels. In order to keep our retailers informed of the demand, at least from the coupon program, we do have a specific program that is geared completely towards keeping retailers informed about request rates. We do this by zip code. We have a lot of information on our website that's dedicated to providing retailer information. So our efforts are to ensure that retailers understand in their areas where they need to be maintaining a certain amount of inventory. And then retailers, if needed, can order boxes with sufficient amount of time. It was good news to hear, I think at your last hearing, that the manufacturers were going to be able to manufacture boxes in a shorter time frame, but it certainly is something that is worth keeping an eye on, because if every coupon is redeemed, there won't be sufficient boxes to meet that demand.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me ask you one additional question. Some on this panel have suggested that you should only send coupons to over-the-air only households. In other words, households that have no cable or satellite subscription but rely completely on over-the-air television to receive service. I disagree with that. I think those households clearly should be the priority. But I think that households that have a cable or satellite subscription but perhaps have televisions on a different floor where the cable or satellite wires don't run, and where those televisions are over-the-air dependent, should be able to get coupons to the extent that you have coupons available to supply them. So my question to you is, what is your approach, and what will be your approach going toward June 12 in terms of the homes to which you are supplying coupons pursuant to request?
Yeah, NTA does share the concerns that completely unprepared households are able to prepare themselves before the transition date. Our current program, thanks to the delay, we were able to change our rules so that we are in fact able to prioritize over-the-air household coupon requests should the need arise. We are going to carefully monitor the number of requests that we get to make sure that if we get ourselves into another situation where we see a possible end of our funding limit, then we can begin prioritizing over-the-air households and make sure that they get those coupons.
But at the present time, you're honoring requests without regard to whether they are over-the-air only or households that simply need converter boxes. Is that correct?
That is correct. We are honoring requests for all households that apply for the coupon program.
Let me encourage you to continue doing that, prioritizing as need be the over-the-air only households. They should be the first priority. But to the extent that you have coupon availability beyond those, you should also honor the requests coming from households that simply need converter boxes but also have a cable or satellite subscription. My time has expired, but I am going to take the liberty of asking Mr. Copps a question, and I'll be generous with other members. Mr. Copps, you mentioned in your testimony the problems associated with the fact that digital signals do not have the same propagation characteristics as analog signals. And there will be households that can get an analog signal from a given television station that, when this transition occurs, will not get the digital signal from that same station, implying, of course, the need to do something about antenna readjustment or antenna replacement. And you and I have both been to Whitehaven, England, and seen firsthand the circumstances that pertained there when they transitioned to digital a couple of years ago. And what struck me on that visit was the extraordinary number of antennas that had to be replaced entirely. It was more than 10% of the total. And we're now seeing that problem arise here in some of the markets that have transitioned, and we have concern that additional rural areas in particular will experience this problem on June the 12th. And so my question to you, broadly spoken, is what are you doing to assist in getting people prepared for this eventuality, and what should we be thinking about in terms of aiding you in that effort?
Well, it requires, I think, a new level of education, and this was not a message that went out early enough. Again, I think if we had had the kind of public sector, private sector partnership I've been harping for 2 years, we would have identified a problem like this much earlier on than the time when we actually did. We focused so much on the boxes, and people got their boxes, and then ran into these antenna problems. So we are requiring in the consumer education that stations do going forward that we educate people about the antenna problem. We have a new tool on our FCC DTV webpage to instruct people on the strength of the signals coming into their specific zip code. You can just type in your zip code and you'll find the stations and the strength that they're broadcasting at and where the direction they're coming from, help you to aim your antenna and things like that. But there's you could have 5 or 10% of the people that are going to experience this problem. It's not going to be resolved by June. We should have done these kinds of studies much earlier on and identified the problem. There are things we can do. We're trying to get distributed transmission systems going to strengthen signals and all of that, but they all take time and they take money for a hard-pressed industry right now.
Thank you, Mr. Copps. Ms. Gomez, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gomez, welcome to our committee, and for your first time, I suspect, and so we appreciate that. The gentleman from New York indicated this was totally mismanaged. Of course, Mr. Markey was chairman the last 2 years, and Mr. Upton, distinguished gentleman from Michigan. They had hearing after hearing, so I don't know if mismanagement is a good appellation to put on this, because I think they were on top of it. In fact, you heard Ms. Blackburn indicate that no one had any problem with the transition in her congressional district. Mr. Terry indicated there were 33 calls out of 412,000 households. Mr. Upton in his congressional district in Michigan had 1 call. In my congressional district, we transitioned also. So I appreciate everybody's apprehension here about this being mismanaged, but I think the evidence so far has been that it seems to be working, at least in several of the congressional districts here on the Republican side. So, and I commend Mr. Markey and Mr. Upton for all the work they did on this. Assistant Secretary Gomez, the theory behind this delay was that 5% were unprepared homes. The stimulus legislation obviously gave an extremely wide latitude on how to spend this roughly $650 million in additional funding. Shouldn't we just spend $350 million to cover 2 redeemed coupons for each remaining unprepared, exclusively over-the-air home, and return the rest of the money, which I think would be a good signal to the people out there in America that we're trying to do things with less money and return what we don't need?
Well, under the Act, and our goals are to provide the coupons to every requesting household, as you know. While we do share the concern about making sure that over-the-air households are prepared, as I mentioned, we are going to make sure that they are able to provide the coupons to those households if we end up in another situation where we have a wait list possible. And so what we knew back in January was that we had about 6.5 million households unprepared. Since that time, we've been able to provide coupons to 1.2 million over-the-air households. So we are making progress. We want to make sure that we're able to provide the coupons to the households that aren't themselves prepared for the rest of this time, and we are going to monitor carefully.
Well, have you ruled out the possibility that you'll return money? Because there's a lot of people have coupons. There's 7 million coupons that have been unredeemed, and then with this new money, you'll have totally more. Even if you take out the administration costs and the education costs, you're still going to have a lot of money. You'll have, I conjecture, almost 20 million coupons out there, and you got 4 million homes, times 2 is 8 million, so you could possibly have more coupons than households that need it. Is a possibility in your mind that you would return the money that you don't use?
Well, any coupons that go on, any money that goes unused will be returned at the end of the program.
Yeah, well, okay. In the legislation, the stimulus package allowed the NTIA to transfer some or all of the $90 million in consumer education funds to the FCC, so long as you give the House and Senate appropriators at least 5-day advance notice. Has the NTIA transferred any money to the FCC yet?
No, the money hasn't been transferred yet. In fact, we have our request to Congress prepared, and that should be coming shortly. That will delineate how the FCC plans to use that money.
And how much are you talking about?
We're talking about $65 million at this point.
How did you come up with $55 million as opposed to $20 million or $100 million? How did you come up with $55 million?
It's actually $65 million. We
65.
worked, yes.
Not 55, it's
right,
65.
it's 65.
How did it go from 55 to 65?
You just said it.
Just a slip?
Yes.
Wow, $10 million.
We worked with the FCC closely, and they came up with the projections of what they would need. They sent us a request, and we did take a look at it. We will be providing, like I said, a letter that delineates how specifically each of those categories are going to be used.
Can you send that letter to Chairman Boucher and myself?
Certainly.
I mean, I would be, I think, Mr. Boucher, you'd like a copy of that, and I'd like to, whether it's 55 or 65.
Yes.
Mr. Kopp, she indicated that the FCC was intimately involved with coming up with this request. You might want to comment.
Yeah, we're looking at, as I said, a new level of consumer education and outreach. So we are planning to use those monies and put out some requests for proposal in the very near future, which will help to ensure that the call center operation is up and running and calibrated the way it should be for help centers and in-home assistance and for media buys and public relations. Because the requests for proposals have not gone out yet, they tell me it's best not to get into saying how much in each one of those categories because you can kind of mess up the bidding process in doing that, and I have no desire to do that. But I think based on the proposals that we have put forward and also some of the work we're talking about with AmeriCorps and the firefighters, that it's going to be a tremendous return on investment. A lot of this is going to be just getting processes going with the firefighters and with AmeriCorps, and they will mobilize, but a lot of the labor that will come to it will be volunteer labor. So I think we're going to get a really good return on the investment.
Okay. Mr. Copps, I just wanted to congratulate you. You and I are probably the only ones talking about during this transition having a demonstration project. And I remember when you came to my office, you and I both agreed, and
right.
There's very few of us that did. And as it turned out, we did a demonstration project in Wilmington, North Carolina. And, you know, the chairman of the FCC was up here, and it turned out it was very successful. Obviously, there were some people that did call, but relative to the percentage, it worked very well, which I think went to another part of our attempt to try and manage this. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stearns. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell, is recognized for 5 minutes.
And Ms. Gomez, congratulations. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you.
Ms. Gomez, as you are aware, NTIA during the previous administration stated to this subcommittee that it had adequate funding with which to meet consumer demand for digital television converter boxes. As we have learned, this was quite untrue. What have you done to correct this situation?
Yes, sir. Well, thanks to the additional money that Congress provided to us through the Recovery Act, we were able last week to clear out the wait list of coupons and now to dedicate more resources to funding new coupon requests.
Will you have sufficient funds to meet your charges under the law?
Well, I certainly hope so. It's
Hope won't do when you got a bunch of mad consumers on you.
That is correct, which is why what we are doing is retargeting and refocusing our efforts, because we want to make sure that those consumers that need this program the most are educated and understand their need to get that money today, get the coupons today, so that they can prepare themselves immediately.
See, I saw when we did this, we first gave NTIA $5 million to publicize it. That was clearly not enough. We gave you more money later, I think $90 million. And we now find ourselves in a situation, though, where I see nothing going on out there in terms of public information flow to the consumers about this. So I'm curious, will you commit to us to keeping us fully informed about the status of the level of funding and the availability of coupons and the availability of the converter boxes?
Yes, I will commit to do that. We will continue to provide information.
Ms. Gomez, how does NTIA currently predict consumer demand for these coupons?
We actually don't have a prediction today for what the consumer demand will be. We've been able to learn.
That?
Well, the truth is, now that we are reissuing, we're permitting the reissuance of coupons for consumers that had their coupons expire. We expect to have demand increase, but we need to monitor over the next several weeks to see, now that we've advertised the availability of reissuance, to see how much that increases the level of demand from consumers today.
See, we have given you additional time, additional money, and you now have until sometime in June when you've got to see to it that you've gotten all your coupons out, you've gotten all your coupons back, everybody's got a converter box, so we don't have a bunch of mad consumers on our hands. And I can just tell you that I anticipate full well we're going to have some angry people calling our offices about the fact that this has not been properly handled. How can you assure us that you're going to meet your deadline? And how can you assure us that you're going to have the adequate number of coupons, the adequate number of boxes, and that they're going to be in place?
We are planning for making sure that we target the populations that most need this type of help, because it is true. You're actually right. The coupon program isn't going to be what makes sure that by June 12th all consumers don't call your offices. So what we have to do is dedicate our resources to making sure that we provide both the technical assistance, which is what the FCC is working on, as well as make sure that our community partnerships, our public-private partnerships, our friends in the broadcast industry and the cable industry continue to help us to provide that assistance to consumers. That is the way that we are going to be able to make sure that the outrage isn't there, even if we don't.
You have not comforted me. Mr. Copps, you've indicated in your testimony that you have new problems which apparently are coming to my attention for the first time with regard to how the difference in coverage in the service areas of analog versus digital is going to impact. What are you doing to make sure that you're going to have full service across the entire service area of these new digital broadcasting operations?
We are not going to be able to ensure that we have full coverage of digital signals in current broadcasting areas. We are going to try to alleviate the problem that is out there. We are going to try to educate consumers to the extent of the problem, to forewarn them, and hopefully to forearm them by calling upon the stations to help us to get that message out, and then try to encourage whatever technical solutions are realizable between now and June. But as I said in my statement, things like putting up new translator stations, distributed transmission systems are time-consuming and costly. So this is one of those problems that, again, because of the lack of coordination, didn't come to everybody's visibility soon enough. Pardon me?
Lack of coordination between who? FCC, NTI?
No, I think the lack for the last few years of a really coordinated public-private sector partnership where we really had interagency coordination. I was part of the Y2K exercise in the previous administration, two previous administrations ago. I was Assistant Secretary of Commerce, and I knew what a coordinated interagency public sector, private sector partnership looked like, where the leadership was involved, where we were coordinated with the White House. All the agencies were there, and we were contacting business and identifying problems early on and making mid-course corrections and devising solutions. We're trying to invent that kind of process here in the last 2 months that should have been up and running 2 years ago.
And that's one of the unfortunate things. Mr. Copps, you have indicated that FCC is working with NTIA to develop a list of hotspots to ensure a more targeted consumer approach. How have FCC and NTIA determined these hotspots, and are both of your agencies confident of this approach's success, and what more has to be done? I'll ask you to respond, and Ms. Gomez also.
Well, I'm hopeful. We are working to identify those hotspots, and there's some 49 of them based on the latest Nielsen data on DMA numbers, percentages of over-the-air households, coupon requests, redemption rates, poverty rates, a whole bunch of different criteria to really show us where the most vulnerable areas are and where we need to be devoting the limited resources that we are capable of deploying for this purpose.
So the answer is you don't really have the resources you need to identify these areas.
Well, we're identifying, and we will have hopefully additional resources. Again, not enough that I'm going to sit here and guarantee that everything is going to go swimmingly well.
Ms. Gomez, do you have adequate resources? And are you in any better shape than Mr. Copps and the FCC are in to address this problem?
Well, I can say that we are working very hard to address the problem, and we are very grateful for the ability to work with the FCC.
You have not solved the problem. Do you have the resources you need to address it in the time that you confront between now and the 12th of June?
I do think we have the resources, particularly with the resources that we got from the Recovery Act from the Congress.
I've used 2 minutes and 44 seconds more than my time, Mr. Chairman. I apologize to you and the members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Your questioning has enlightened all of us, and the time was certainly well spent. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, is recognized for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm not going to use all my time because we've been notified we're going to have votes, a series of votes on the floor momentarily. So I do want to just cover a couple of things. First, I guess some of us won't be here for the second panel. I want to praise, particularly in Michigan, all of our folks, the NAB and others. They did really a terrific job in getting the word out. They actually did polling in Michigan, and I want to say something like 95% of the folks knew that they had to make some change. And I'll make a little joke at the expense of my guy here, Joe Barton. I mean, Joe Barton was so convinced. He has cable now. This is a new thing for him. But even Joe was asking about how to get a cable box and hoped Mr. Copps, you might be able to go help him hook it up. And I assured him that was really not the case and not needed. But in all kidding aside, the industry and the cable folks just did a marvelous job. And our broadcasters, particularly, I did a number of things with my local broadcasters in Kalamazoo and South Bend, two markets that cover our district in southwest Michigan, and with our retailers, and looked at a number of different folks, and it worked without a hitch. And some of them have changed. And of course, when I worked with Mr. Markey and Mr. Boucher as well, and obviously Mr. Barton and Mr. Dingle, as we crafted this legislation a number of years ago, this was the #1 recommendation by the 911 Commission: get it done. Because if we have something else happen, this is the #1 thing to make sure that our citizens are protected in the future. And they trashed, frankly, the 911 Commission trashed the Congress 2 or 3 years ago when they didn't think we had moved fast enough. And of course, that was one of the reasons that a number of us objected to the delay, because the word was out. And a number of us co-authored. Mr. Stearns was a big part of that too, legislation that was introduced at the end of, I think, in the last session as well as the beginning of this session, legislation that would actually provide the accounting fix to allow the coupons still to go out, but we just wouldn't take it down from the spending until they were actually redeemed rather than when they were mailed out. Of course, you have a number of coupons that were never used. and you've got a number of them that are still laying on someone's desk, in their desk drawer for maybe weeks to come until they go to Sears or Best Buy, wherever they have to go. But my question is this, and before I yield back, it's fairly clear when you look at the numbers that we're going to have a number of coupons, never redeemed. The $650 million that was in the stimulus package, I think the number was about, 4 million homes not being serviced as of March 1st in terms of over-the-air. Is that right, Ms. Goldman? So if you, we provided enough money in the stimulus for 12 million coupons. So if you've got 4 million unredeemed homes and they each get 2 coupons, and they really need them, unlike Joe Barton, you're going to have hundreds of millions of dollars that's never going to need to be spent, right? So what happens to that money in June? What happens to the money that's not used because we've done too many of these coupons, or they've never redeemed?
Well, at the end of the program, any money that's left over will be deobligated, will be returned to the Treasury.
And when will that decision be made? Because, of course, the transition date is June 12th. So let's say someone says, oh, it might finally be time. We'll use Mr. Shimkus's example, April 15th with taxes, June 12th. So maybe they call that 800 number or get online or figure out how to do it. Maybe they go June 5th. They get the coupon, so it's really good until August or September, right? At what point do you actually say enough's enough?
Yeah. Under the law, we were able to extend the date, or the law extended the date for folks to apply for coupons to July 31st. So if you take into account processing...
That'll take you to the end of the fiscal year.
So further beyond that, I think.
So the unobligated balance, what happens to that? At what point do you say, Treasury, here's your money back? I hope you say that.
I don't know if there's a specific deadline for that. I'm sorry. I'd have to go back and make sure I check that.
Mr. Copps, do you know? Would you all weigh in on that decision at all or not? Are you completely out of that?
No, I don't know technically when it would go back. I would assume if we're going to go out of the coupon granting business, then you give it the time to get those redeemed, and at that time the money's left over goes back. I would hope that would be before the end of the fiscal year, but I can't tell you.
And Ms. Gomez, what happens to if you've got millions of coupons that perhaps don't actually get delivered? Is there still a fee that, I guess in this case, what IBM would collect on the? I mean, is there still a processing fee that is paid out to the private sector for those or not?
That's a good question, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one because I'm not sure how exactly under the contract how exactly those fees are assessed.
Okay, I know votes have started. I'll yield back my time. Thank you both.
Thank you very much, Mr. Upton. We have votes now pending on the floor, but I think time for one more member to ask questions, and I'm pleased to recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you all address the status of the call centers? Are you finding that the call centers have adequate capacity to handle current volumes of calls? Do we have enough bilingual operators? What are the wait times that callers can expect? And then what plans do you have in place to handle the surge in calls on and after the transition date?
Well, we are in the process of getting ready to put out a request for proposal for call centers to buttress the FCC call center that's already existent. There were some problems with that. We're working mightily to correct those. I think most of them did a fine job, but I was up in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where our call center is located a couple of weeks ago, and the agents up there were saying we really would like to have more training. So now we have an opportunity to do more training and give them a level of technical proficiency and responsiveness that they presently don't have. So we're going to be working on that. With regard to the bilingual, no, we don't have enough. I think you can make the case, and my friend Kyle McSlaro in the cable industry has observed that only 2% of Hispanics lived in areas that have completely transitioned already, but 13% of the calls that came in were from Spanish-speaking people. So I think if we play this out a little bit, you're going to see that we're going to have the ability to do much better with regard to that. I want to make one other response on the call center thing, though, too, because lots of folks have said, well, you didn't get all those calls. I would also note that we've had 14.5 million hits on our internet site. And, you know, we all got to kind of acclimate ourselves to the new world we live in, but I suspect perhaps a percentage of those people who might otherwise have taken to the telephones have gone on the internet. We are trying to put better tools and help up there to inform them, and I think that's something we need to take into our calculation as we go forward too. But we're cognizant of the limitations we had in the program, and we are dedicated to trying to make it better. Industry was a huge help in the period leading up to February 17th. They continue and will continue their call center operations until the middle of April, and then we'll have to adjust after that and make sure that we can handle everything through the other resources that exist.
Thank you, and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Castor. Mr. Weiner, actually Mr. Radanovich has joined us from California, and he would be next in the order. We have votes pending on the floor. It would be nice if we could excuse this panel without having to come back. Could the gentleman perhaps ask 2 minutes worth of questions? And
the question to ask.
That'll be great. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and thank you for being here. Assistant Secretary Gomez, the Delay Act allows the NTIA to issue downloadable coupons. My understanding, however, is that both the NTIA and retailers have previously expressed fraud and implementation problems with downloadable coupons. Are you still considering using downloadable coupons?
No, we have decided not to issue downloadable coupons. It's my belief that a year ago, downloadable coupons would have been a really good idea. Unfortunately, with the short amount of time that we have left and the population that we have left to reach, it was our feeling, both for purposes of trying to develop something that would withstand waste, fraud, and abuse issues, as well as something that would be usable, it would probably be a little too late by the time we got the systems up and running.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Radanovich. Mr. Weiner from New York.
Thank you. I'll be brief. First of all, I signed up for a coupon several weeks ago and it hasn't arrived. So I don't know. Maybe you can look it up. It's Ascan Avenue, Forest Hills, New York. Mr. Copps, is there any way of telling whether we're going to have wide-scale problems in large urban areas where there's all kinds of different topography that's guided by tall buildings, sometimes parks, sometimes in the communities, the suburban communities where sometimes the broadcast signal has to pass through a city to get to the suburbs? Do we have any good, I mean, I know there have been a couple of times I've read anecdotal things that there have been tests that they flipped off in the middle of the night just to see how it works. Do we have any sense whether that's going to be a problem?
I have that sense. I guess it would be largely anecdotal from traveling around that there are indeed going to be problems. Everywhere I go, I run into people who are experiencing such problems already, so there's no question in my mind but that they exist and that we're going to have to deal with them. Again, I think that we were remiss in not getting those kind of studies done and on the shelf long before we got into these waning months of the transition. And those large urban areas also worry me, not just because of the technical limitations of and the propagation characteristics of the digital signal, but because there are so many low-income people there, and there's so many people for whom English is not the primary language, and they're more difficult to reach, and there's seniors there and minorities there. So that's where a tremendous part of our outreach.
But even if it's running well, even if the system runs well, even if it gets there, I mean, do we have a good sense in a city like New York, for example, where a lot of people already have their antennas and they're hooked up? Do we have a sense whether the signal's reaching them? I mean, to some degree, we're going to have a problem that some people are going to fear that they just hooked it up wrong. It's going to be a problem on that level. But do we have a sense that the technology is going to reach these people?
I think in most cases, if you've done everything right with the with the converter box and the antenna and all the rest, you're going to be all right. But it is not going to be ubiquitous, and there are going to be those people calling your office and my office who say, "Hey, I listened to you. I got the box. I got the antenna. I know I'm aimed in the right direction, and I'm still not getting that signal. What are you going to do about it?
Well, I
hear
appreciate
that.
it.
I hear that wherever I go.
Thank you. And in knowing how government bureaucracies sometimes engage in overkill, Ms. Gomez, I just need one. I don't need 7 people showing up at my house. I don't need 200 of them showing. Just that one would be great.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weiner. I'm going to ask unanimous consent that NTIA's weekly converter box coupon program status update be placed in the record. Without objection, so ordered. Thanks to this panel. You have done an excellent job. Your testimony this morning has also been very enlightening. We appreciate your joining us. We have 7 votes pending on the floor, and that means the next panel will take up when we can return. So until that point, probably 45 minutes to an hour from now, this subcommittee stands in recess.
Thank you.
The subcommittee will reconvene. My apologies for the lateness of the time here. We now welcome our second panel for the afternoon. Mr. Mark Lloyd is Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. Mr. Peter Morrell is the General Manager of Idaho Public Television. Mr. Robert Prather, Jr. is the President of Gray Television. Mr. Gary Severson is Senior Vice President and General Manager of Entertainment for the Walmart stores. Mr. Gary Shapiro is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Consumer Electronics Association. And Mr. Christopher Wood is Vice President, Senior Legal Counsel, and DTV Compliance Officer for Univision Communications. We welcome each of our witnesses, and without objection, your prepared written statement will be made a part of the record. We would welcome now your oral presentations and ask that you keep those to approximately 5 minutes. And Mr. Wood, we'll be pleased to begin with you.
Man. Chairman Boucher, Ranking Member Stevens, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Chris Wood, and I am Vice President and Senior Legal Counsel of Univision Communications, where I have responsibility for DTV compliance matters. I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon about our efforts to ensure that the Hispanic community is prepared for the digital transition, together with our public and private partners. Univision is the country's leading Spanish-language media company. Our assets include the Univision Network, the Telefuturo Broadcast Network, which provide an array of news, information, sports, and entertainment programming. We also own and operate more than 3 dozen full-power television stations, which will be making the transition to digital television. But Univision is more than just a broadcasting company. Our stations and our networks are integral parts of the community and the culture of U.S. Hispanic households. Spanish language viewers depend on Univision, or Univision, for not just sports and entertainment programming, but also as an essential and reliable source of news, weather, and emergency information. And a significant number of the viewers who rely on Univision also rely exclusively on over-the-air television. So the impact of the digital transition is particularly important to our company. When our CEO, Joe Yuva, testified before this subcommittee in October of 2007, he told you that Univision was committed to being an industry leader in educating and informing viewers about the upcoming digital transition. That month, Univision launched Una Nueva Era TV Digital, our campaign to prepare Hispanics and Spanish-speaking television viewers for the digital transition. That was 6 months before the FCC required any broadcaster to undertake DTV educational initiatives. Since launching that campaign, Univision has created and broadcast 4 half-hour DTV specials. We've included DTV educational messages in our most popular programming. We have covered transition issues in our national and local news and public affairs programs, and we've aired well over 100,000 DTV educational PSAs featuring members of Congress and Univision personalities. Univision also hosts a Spanish-language DTV transition website that has received over 7 million page views. Univision has used its strong ties to the local Hispanic communities in its markets to launch a grassroots initiative that we call Escuadrón Digital, or Digital Squads, in which our stations have reached out directly to their communities through local activities. Altogether, Univision has sponsored more than 250 community events in its markets. For example, we've hosted 25 town hall meetings that have been attended by thousands of viewers. We've also supported events hosted by members of Congress in their own districts. We've organized and funded phone banks. We've participated in 48 soft analog tests to help our analog viewers determine whether they are prepared for DTV. Univision was fully prepared to complete the DTV transition on the original cutoff date of February 17th. Now that the transition has been extended to June 12th, we realize that more remains to be done in the community. Many Hispanic households have yet to achieve an acceptable state of DTV readiness. Although Nielsen reports that Hispanic households are less prepared for the digital transition than the general population, it's also clear that our outreach efforts are working and that the preparedness gap between Hispanic households and households at large has diminished significantly over the past 3 months. So mindful of our unique connection to the Hispanic community, Univision will focus now on continuing educational and informational efforts on the steps viewers need to take in order to be fully prepared to receive digital signals by the June 12th transition date. We're working as we speak today to implement the expanded DTV consumer education requirements now required by the FCC. I'd like to acknowledge the leadership and the guidance of Chairman Boucher and Ranking Member Stearns, and of course their staffs. Your support is critical to enabling us to ensure that all viewers, especially the Hispanic viewers who depend on our service to their communities, are prepared for the transition. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss our efforts, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wood. Mr. Severson.
Chairman Boucher, Ranking Member Stearns, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to appear before your subcommittee on behalf of Walmart stores and the Consumer Electronics Retailers Coalition, or CERC. Since joining Walmart in 1994, I've managed a variety of merchandising departments. I'm currently Senior Vice President and General Manager of Entertainment, which includes electronics. I believe that we are going to complete our transition to digital television successfully. Aside from congressional oversight, much of the credit for a successful converter box program should go to the leadership and staff of the NTIA past and present. CERC is also working with the FCC staff very constructively today on the final and crucial stages of consumer education and outreach. We are proud that retailers' training and education efforts have received high marks from the FCC. As other CERC witnesses have told this subcommittee, the DTV transition has been a professional experience without precedent, made more complex and challenging by adjustments to the program. Walmart saw converter box demand increase in the days leading up to each local transition, but we have been meeting each challenge and are confident we will meet the final ones. Walmart has worked to ensure that our customers are aware of the transition. Our stores have featured the converter boxes through special displays, a 30-second video running in the electronics area, a countdown clock to February 17th, print advertising space, and in-store signing. In advertising terms alone, we value in the millions of dollars the time that Walmart's in-store video network devoted to educating our customers about the DTV transition. Walmart, like other CERC members, has participated in community-based efforts to reach the underserved population, including FCC-sponsored field activities and the successful DTV Roadshow education campaign, which made many stops at Walmart stores across the country. Conversations will continue, conversions will continue one by one through June 9th, with the balance of television stations transitioning on June 12th. Communicating clear, concise, market-specific advice to consumers over this period will be a particular challenge. Currently, we are changing signs in our stores to direct consumers to websites and telephone numbers to obtain the most accurate and up-to-date local information. We're also considering new in-store electronic messaging for our TV wall and point of sale. Walmart remains a leading seller of coupon-eligible converters. Over 90% of our converter sales have been made with the assistance of coupons. To date, all of our models have been sold under $50, a highly competitive price among retailers. Once we saw that the coupon waiting list would be cleared, we started air freighting converter boxes to our stores. As the weeks progress, we will be very well situated to serve anticipated future demand of our customers through the end of June. Projecting store needs on a weekly basis, we are generally able to restock very quickly and remedy gaps in supply. Minor delays have occurred only when external events upset the supply or demand cycles. We have not been encountering many consumer problems as customers understand that fluctuating inventory levels has been a fluid situation. With antennas, like others, we have seen a noticeable increase in demand. Antennas that offer the most consumer satisfaction are those at each end of the price range, the least expensive set-top antennas and the more expensive rooftop antennas. Walmart is making additional antenna purchases for the balance of this year in both categories. We think that we will be able to serve our customers well as their remaining local stations move to their final power frequency and tower position. While our converters have had a very low rate of return compared to average electronics products, our return rate on antennas has been somewhat higher. As consumers find the models that best suit their own needs, we understand that other electronics retailers are seeing similar return rates on antennas. While we will focus on addressing the needs of our customers in the store, we encourage all stakeholders to focus on educating viewers on what to do after returning home. We are pleased with efforts that encourage viewers to rescan converter boxes frequently to capture additional channels. Walmart is pleased to testify today, Chairman Boucher. Thank you. Additionally, as we look ahead, we hope to work closely with the committee in addressing energy use and recycling issues, especially as they pertain to electronics. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Severson. Mr. Shapiro.
Chairman Boucher, Chairman Dingell, Mr. Shimkus, thank you so much, members of the subcommittee, for inviting me to testify on behalf of the Consumer Electronics Association. I have three main points. First, the DTV transition has been and will continue to be an incredibly successful partnership between government and all affected industries, the most successful in our history. Second, as the results of the February 17th date demonstrate, consumer experience with the DTV transition has been overwhelmingly positive. With our most recent survey of the market, we see ample evidence to suggest that manufacturers and retailers will continue to meet consumer demand for converter boxes and antennas. Finally, in light of the program's success and the enormous benefits arising from the migration to the digital spectrum, we ask that you not again delay the transition beyond June 12th. We represent the $172 billion United States consumer electronics industry. We have over 2,200 corporate members, including manufacturers, retailers, distributors of digital televisions, antennas, converter boxes, and a range of other products. More relevant for this hearing, though, this is the industry that invented digital television. And I even have a deep personal stake in the success. I was here over 20 years ago when this committee held the very first hearing. And indeed, my wife and I met over a chairlift when I overheard her talking on her cell phone about digital television. And I innocently asked, what is this thing called HDTV she was talking about? I am so passionate about digital television that my tombstone will be 16:9 aspect ratio. Well, we've almost reached the end of this 20-year process. We work with broadcasters at WRC here in Washington to establish the first DTV broadcast station in '96. We helped create the Advanced Television Test Center to test all the different proponents, and we were a founding member of the Advanced Television Systems Committee, which set the standards for DTV. And we have helped lead the effort to educate the public about the transition. We helped found the DTV Transition Coalition, which now has 200 diverse groups, a group whose mission is to ensure that not one consumer in the United States loses broadcast television service due to a lack of information. And our aggressive effort outreach have reached millions of consumers, retailers, manufacturers, and legislators about the transition. We created and operate the website antennaweb.org, which we manage with NAB, and that helps consumers choose the right antenna for their location. We have digitaltips.org, which helps consumers learn about the transition. We have a video. We hired Florence Henderson of the Brady Bunch to get to the elder people, to reach out to them. And we've done a lot in the retailer training and consumer education area. And I think we've been successful. We started out in 2006, 41% of consumers were familiar. By the end of 2007, it was 80%. Today, Nielsen, who I think understates it, says that 96% of all TV homes are now aware about the transition date and are prepared for it. If these conservative numbers even are correct, we'll be about as close to 100% as you can be by June 12th. This has been the most successful industry-government cooperative relationship probably since World War II. The first DTV hearing held by Chairman Markey focused on this appropriately. And the broadcasting, cable, satellite, and public interest sectors worked together in a DTV transition coalition to ensure that we've been prepared to make the switch. It's been bipartisan cooperation, and I want to commend the FCC and the NTIA, both past and present, for their tremendous work in running these programs. And this committee for over 2 decades of oversight over this important transition. I remain convinced we are fully prepared for a successful and consumer-friendly transition. Why? First, recall that by February 18th, more than 1/3 of the broadcasters had fully transitioned to digital. Prior to that day, some groups were claiming that this mini-transition would leave millions without television, would overwhelm the FCC's call center, and would cause tremendous harm to the most vulnerable among us who could not be prepared in time. The predictions of these naysayers simply did not come true. Unfortunately, the mindset of groups that predicted massive failures on February 18th continues to dominate their outlook for June 12th. And based on our newest information, I believe that they are wrong again. To date, roughly 26 million coupons have been redeemed, and we're projecting about some 4.2 million coupons will be redeemed from April until June, the June transition date. And through talking to retailers, major retailers and manufacturers, we believe inventory through the remainder of the transition will be robust and sufficient to cover projected demand over the next 3 months. But the marketplace is such that each retailer and each box supplier makes independent decisions, and this type of transition has absolutely no historical precedent. Digital TVs are selling well despite the recession. Last year, almost 33 million sets were sold, and I'm pleased to announce today that this year to date, we're up 47% in DTV sales over the same period last year. And antenna sales are also selling well in recent months. To summarize, our survey data suggests that manufacturers and retailers will likely meet consumer demand for converter boxes and antenna through the end of the transition, the June date. We will not know for sure whether this is the case until the nation actually completes the DTV transition. This is as true today as it would have been if we had not delayed the date for February 17th. In response to the significant recent changes made to the coupon program, manufacturers and retailers have adjusted nimbly to ensure that market demands will be met. Now, as I've been saying for the last 15 years, this transition is historic. There will always be bumps in the road, but we've overcome every one of them, and they've all been, frankly, more significant than what we're facing now. There's no evidence at this point of large-scale dislocations that would justify a further delay, which is my final point. I want to elaborate on it because I'm seeing I will not elaborate on it because I saw your positive affirmation that there will not be a delay, so I won't have to convince you why it's great to stay the course. So I thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shapiro. Mr. Morrill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Stearns and members of the committee, especially Mr. Dingell. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And for the honor to be able to testify before you on behalf of Idaho Public Television and the Association of Public Television Stations. Now, I come to you from a state whose geography has always challenged the human spirit. In 1805, our Bitterroot Mountains nearly repelled the Lewis and Clark expedition. The Oregon Trail that crosses our southern desert has always been called the world's longest cemetery due to the toll it took on pioneering families. Idaho Public Television, which reaches 97% of the state's population, has worked for a decade to ensure that the digital transition gets a little friendlier reception. Since last July alone, we've broadcast more than 52 hours of DTV consumer education announcements, not programs, but announcements. Our efforts were bolstered in January by the $35,000 DTV Consumer Assistance Grant that we received from the FCC. We hired an additional full-time engineer dedicated to responding to viewers' technical inquiries and produced 2 programs and 6 informational spots discussing the transition, including the importance of antenna placement and VHF-UHF channel changes. Other public television station recipients of the FCC grant launched their own initiatives. For example, as noted by Representative Space, WOSU from Columbus, Ohio, teamed with local agencies for the elderly to train staff and volunteers to install converter boxes in homes and senior residences. Congress has specified $90 million of the stimulus funds be steered toward DTV consumer outreach. We are hopeful that much of that funding can be directed toward public television stations to build upon the success of the first wave of grants. Local public television stations have a unique combination of public trust, technical expertise, and unmatched local access that will enable us to provide necessary assistance. I urge the committee to focus on the last few steps between the antenna and the TV set, which is where consumers are going to need the most help between now and June 12th. My experience has been that there is an overarching need for in-home assistance for converter box scanning and antenna installation, particularly for the elderly. Other top priorities should be telephone and walk-in help centers staffed with well-trained personnel ready to help with location and station-specific issues. We also need to be realistic about the limits of consumer education. As Chairman Copps noted earlier, some viewers will not be able to receive all of the stations they did before the transition. In those cases, full station disclosure is vital. For example, in Idaho, some viewers within our service contour will lose coverage because, well, the digital signal doesn't travel well through those darn mountains. In late December, the FCC introduced options for stations to fill in these holes using translators. But because of the short time frame and the desperate economic conditions that exist right now, it will be extremely difficult to finance and deploy these systems. I respectfully request that this committee assist by supporting digital television fill-in service by granting stations at least 2 years to build out such systems and by making funding available immediately without a local match requirement. Finally, I must emphasize the need for increased federal funding for public television station operations to offset dramatic declines in revenue from non-federal sources of funding. Individual contributions, corporate underwriting, foundation, and state support constitute 85% of our total operating revenue. Every day brings more news of station programming, personnel, and service cuts. Some stations are in a fight for survival. In Idaho, we are projecting that the state will reduce our fiscal operating budget by nearly $300,000 from the previous year and will eliminate our $1.1 million request needed for capital equipment for our last major piece of the statewide digital conversion. Think DTV fill-in translators here. Finally, public broadcasting provides important educational programming, especially for preschool children. We are the most trusted source of news and information at a time when media are increasingly fragmented and newspapers are failing. We are virtually the only source remaining for cultural arts TV programming. We ask for the support of the members of this authorizing committee for increased federal funding so that public television may weather this economic typhoon and continue to provide innovative public media content and outreach to help all Americans do the same. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'll look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrell. Mr. Lloyd, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, Mr. Winter. Thank you very much, and really appreciate the leadership of this committee, and especially Chairman Emeritus Dingell for sort of following these issues so closely and vigorously over the years. My name is Mark Lloyd. I'm the Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights and the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights Education Fund. LCCREF is a national social justice organization working to establish equal opportunity in America through education and public outreach. We've been working on informing the public about the digital television transition for about 2 years now, and this work includes participating in the DTV Steering Committee and on the DTV Coalition, presenting at national conferences, and thanks to a grant from NTIA, working on the ground in 7 markets since last December to assist vulnerable populations make the transition to digital television. These populations include the poor, ethnic minorities, senior citizens, and people with disabilities. We're working in Portland, in the Seattle-Tacoma market, in the San Francisco Bay Area, San Antonio, Minneapolis, Atlanta, and yes, Mr. Dingle, Detroit. We are assisting with people filing applications for the DTV converter box requests, helping people identify and acquire the converter box most appropriate to their needs, working to help people set up the equipment in their homes to continue to receive over-the-air television service. We believe, as we think Congress intended, that all Americans should have access to free over-the-air television service, and our work on the ground has confirmed that free over-the-air service is a vital lifeline for many in our communities. We would like to thank Congress again for adjusting the DTV or the TV Translator program and authorizing NTIA to distribute additional funds for our educational work, and it gets this funding that's make our work possible in the 7 cities. And we would like to thank you for extending the transition date to June 12 and providing additional funds to support the educational and outreach effort. We can assure you that many Americans in the communities that we were working in were frankly panicked in December when they found out from NTIA that they had run out of funds and that they were establishing a waiting list for coupons. More time was clearly needed to prepare for this transition. We can also assure you that we've made very good use of taxpayer dollars in our outreach to vulnerable communities. In the 7 markets, we've opened up over 16 DTV assistance centers, established relations with a couple of dozen DTV partners, and provided direct assistance to roughly 20,000 individuals in several different languages. In each of our cities, we've established coupon exchange programs. Our DTV assistance centers and other partners help roughly 100 walk-ins and telephone callers every day. We've connected community groups to both mainstream public and commercial media, and our work with ethnic media has allowed us to reach groups the ubiquitous TV PSAs did not reach. All of our assistance centers were inundated with calls on February 17 and the 2 days that followed. Many of the calls were about reception problems, but for the most part they reflected general confusion about whether the transition was happening or not. These calls petered out after the first few days, but the confusion, frankly, still continues. We are now providing daily news updates and reports to some 70 people working on the ground on our front lines. We call news articles and reports about what's happening with the transition that we get from our contacts here on the Hill, at the FCC, at NTIA, at the White House, and with the DTV Transition Coalition. But we also provide a central hub for all of our different partners to learn and share with each other how best to reach these most vulnerable, hard-to-reach communities. One of the key problems and continuing problems is the reception. Converter box is simply not enough. Many of the calls that we get are folks who need new antennas. Sometimes they need powered antennas. We have found the FCC's online map very useful in helping to identify potential signals at locations, but we've also found DTV reception to be inconsistent in the same community and in the same apartment building. Our local partners have been very careful to say we can provide general guidance, but we cannot predict what channels a viewer is going to be able to get. We believe that the work of identifying marginalized communities before the transition is vital. This is difficult work, but it is vital. We've also long called for a rapid response plan to identify and serve those households which, for one reason or another, will fall through the cracks. We believe this work will continue well past the mid-June deadline. We'd very much like to continue to assist in the effort to help these vulnerable communities keep free over-the-air television service. Was happy to hear Ana Gomez announce that we were going to get funding, but frankly, we're still in negotiation, and we're not quite sure what that means as of this point. Very much look forward to your questions again, and thank you very much for your continued oversight and interest in these issues.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Prather, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Weiner, Mr. Dingle. My name is Robert S. Prather, Jr. I'm president of Gray Television, and I want to thank you for inviting us to speak here today. Gray Television is a public company listed on New York Stock Exchange, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. We currently own 36 stations in 30 markets, DMAs 58 to 188. In addition, we're broadcasting 40 digital channels on our digital spectrum through the multicast. We've got 17 CBS, 10 NBC, 8 ABC, and 1 Lonely Fox. We're very proud of the fact that we've got 24 stations out of our group that are #1 in news in their markets. 16 have been #1 for 50 straight years or more, which tells you we've had a long history of being a part of the fabric of these communities. We actually have 1 station in Huntington, Charleston, West Virginia that's celebrating its 60th anniversary. And it's been #1 every day since it's been on the air, so very proud of that. But as of February 17th, 28 Gray stations transitioned to DTV. We believe our stations give a great case study of how preparation, community outreach, and willingness to go the extra mile can prepare viewers for DTV. One thing we set right up front was we want 1 viewer at a time, and we had every one of our managers committed to making sure we took care of every single viewer that called or came to the station, emailed, however they wanted to contact us. We made sure that they got taken care of. We spent over $60 million getting ready for digital television in both transmission equipment and high-definition equipment. And we spent heavily on education and production of educational material for the consumer. Our approach can best be summed up by Brad Ramsey, our manager in Charlottesville, Virginia, who said, "We saw the education process as an opportunity, not a burden." And in response to FCC Education Initiative, we started a company-wide coordinated consumer education program in March of 2008. Our stations exceeded the Commission's call for education by consistently airing more public service announcements, informational crawls, and 30-minute informational segments that the agency's rules required. Our stations extended the consumer education into newsrooms by regularly including DTV transmission in our newscast. In addition, many of our stations participated in market-wide voluntary soft tests that showed viewers what would happen if they were not prepared for the DT transition. Earlier this year, we was clear that there was a small percentage of television viewers would not be ready on February 17th. For broadcasters, a delay could mean many forfeited dollars for tower crews and months of extra utility bills to keep 2 transmitters going. I think Congress wisely balanced the competing needs of unprepared viewers and broadcasters in the DTV Delay Act. Gray believes its stations and markets were ready on February 17th. Furthermore, we believe the viewers would face the same type of difficulties whether the transition occurred in February or in June. I personally tasked all our general managers with assessing whether to proceed with the transition as scheduled or to delay. Our general managers were instructed to consider a number of factors, including market readiness, individual viewer feedback, schedules for tower and equipment work, and whether the station was moving to a different post-transition digital channel and transmitter utility costs. 22 of our stations moved forward on the transition plan. 8 stations decided to stay with the analog. In fact, one of our 8 stations, WHSV in Harrisonburg, Virginia, initially moved with the transition, but then reassessed its decision 4 days later and requested authority from the Commission to resume analog broadcasts. WHSV's location in Shenandoah Valley in Virginia left it susceptible to a loss of service in several communities because the station's digital signal was blocked by mountainous terrain. Although the majority of the viewers in the market were ready for the transition, our general manager made the decision to resume analog broadcast in order to use the additional time to seek alternative methods to serve these communities. Specifically, WHSV is working to acquire and convert TV translator stations to carry WHE's digital signal to those areas where they may experience a total loss of service. The number and complexity of viewer calls received on or immediately after each station's transition date varied significantly by market. Yet in all markets, certain trends were clear. As expected, the volume of calls peaked on a station's transition day, declined steadily every day thereafter. The majority of the issues could be resolved by providing instructions over the phone, and station employees went to extraordinary lengths to aid the handful of viewers who could not be helped by over-the-phone instructions. In many markets, we had station employees made house calls to assist viewers who had more complex problems. Over and over again, Gray stations found that the calls fell in the same basic categories: improper installation of converter boxes, the need to rescan DTV sets or converter boxes in order to receive the stations on new digital channel, and antenna issues associated with stations that were moving from VHF to UHF channels or vice versa. In Gray's experience, questions on how to obtain a coupon or about the status of the coupon wait list represented a very small fraction of the calls, and even fewer from individuals who were not aware of the digital transition. For Gray, the digital transition has been a positive experience. The majority of Gray's viewers are ready for DTV, but the viewers who were not fully ready, the majority of their specific concerns could not have been identified or resolved until a core group of stations completed the transition. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee and look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to yield myself 5 minutes. Mr. Prather, in some degrees, you were the canary in the coal mine on a couple of issues, right?
Right, yes.
You had the transition. You even had one that transitioned back.
Yes.
Is June going to be sufficient time for that station that transitioned to move the mountains and to? I mean, it seems to me that there are structural problems that you face, and Mr. Morell referred to them as well.
That's a good question. I think the real issue in our particular case is they could get an analog signal in these mountains, but we're on channel 3, which allows, it gives a better coverage in mountainous terrain. They could not get it on our digital channel, and we're working with the county and the state, is part West Virginia, part Virginia, to set up some translators, which we think we can get done by June, where those people can still, they're not even in our market area, but they've been used to getting our signal for a long time. They like our local news. We're really the dominant broadcaster in that part of the country, and so we want to serve those people. So I think we'll be able to, and you know, our manager made the decision to move back because she felt it was important to do the right thing in the community.
Well, as I referred in the question to the first panel, Mr. Kopp referred to as well, that this, in a weird way, the glitch here and the delay has given opportunity for some testing that wasn't contemplated by the original law.
I think that's true, and I think you know, people can learn from both the good things that happened with us and, you know, some of the things that questions. I think the biggest question that came up for us was antenna issues, which frankly we didn't anticipate it. We thought it'd be more box issues.
Well,
but,
I have to tell you, despite Mr. Shapiro's admonition that we shouldn't have delayed it and we shouldn't delay it any further, you're going to be getting a lot of people walking into your retailer saying, hey, what do you got for a mountain obstacle, or what do you got, I mean, that I think that we have to be prepared for. Mr. Lloyd, we've got about 15% of the population went through a transition of some sort, but it seems to me, just at a glancing at the list, they're not communities that have disproportionate numbers of English as a second language, not a large number of communities that have high levels of need, not the type of communities that you were tasked with reaching out to. All that being said, were there some lessons in those little pockets that you've now taken and said, oh, we're in for a mess, or that this isn't going to be so bad? Did you learn anything from that 15% population?
Well, mainly what we've learned is the real importance of high-touch direct assistance for some of these populations, and that I think it's very easy for those of us who are relatively comfortable and sophisticated not to understand the confusion that is created with this transition. Even with people who have boxes, the idea that you need to rescan the box can be very confusing. And we've gone into homes of senior citizens, of people who really view television as a lifeline service. And really they've been in tears at the confusion, thinking that they were going to lose television service. So part of what we've learned is the real importance of being able to go in the homes, of being able to communicate directly in language, in Hmong, in Vietnamese, in obviously Spanish, and a wide variety of languages. That this is not going to be handled easily by a PSA campaign or something that's just going to reach the general population. These are tough populations to reach.
Right. You also have a cultural sense among many senior citizens that the television is essentially a piece of furniture that turns a switch, something goes on. And I think that one of the experiences that's going to be toughest is that the way we are taught to think about television, we're not used to the idea that bad reception means no reception. So that's a cultural thing that we need to I imagine that we need to overcome as well.
Well, that's right. I mean, the other thing, just very quickly, is that a number of folks that we've talked to had cable service. They want over-the-air service. They don't think they can continue to actually afford to continue cable service. And so I think some of the concern about over-the-air television and the need for over-the-air television needs to be more fully understood.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Morrell, just I'm curious, not because I represent a community like Idaho, but what have you found that the fixes that you needed to do to deal with the mountainous terrain? Have you found that the technological fixes that your colleague is trying to explore now, have they worked by and large?
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Chairman, I do want to point out that, first of all, the vast majority of our viewers that view over-the-air digital TV in Idaho are in great shape. We've got some great mountaintop transmitter locations that provide outstanding coverage, but we do have some persistent pockets, primarily in mountainous communities, that do need immediate attention by my organization, and I hope the federal government. These digital fill-in areas are going to be well served by the new guidelines set forth by the FCC. We are hopeful that those guidelines will be updated so that local stations will actually be able to get them on the air in a timely basis, but it all comes down to, sir, funding. In this economic crisis, especially now, I am doubtful that given the current guidelines and funding that we aren't going to be able to get them on unless we have your assistance.
The purpose here. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try to go quickly. Mr. Wood, how much has Univision paid in essence advertising and public announcements to prepare for the transition, the original one in addition to?
You know, I can't give you a figure. It's a substantial amount. 100,000 PSAs, 30-second spots running in prime time and throughout the day is probably a fairly substantial value.
We're talking lots of money, right?
Lots of money.
And we want to thank you for that, because part of what we focused on was, and we knew that the industry would step up to the plate. And they've done multiple more than what the government could do, and I would argue a better job of doing that. Mr. Severson, there are some opening statements that mentioned the fact that we'll run out of digital receivers. Do you believe that? That there won't be enough?
There won't be enough converter boxes?
Yeah, converter boxes for people to buy. You probably have. Walmart probably got enough for...
I don't know that anyone's established what the right number is yet, right. And so that's a challenge for us to all figure out. As we react, the one thing we do, we greatly appreciate the information that the NTIA feeds us on a constant basis in terms of where those coupons are going, how...
Well, I bought my two from Walmart. I want you to know. I got my coupons. I did it early. I listened to the great advertisements, and I've got my cheap antennas, and they work. So
we
let me
appreciate your business.
Yeah. Let me, Mr. Shapiro, in the debate on the floor, when we, I think, foolishly delayed this, and I shouldn't mention this because he's not here, but Mr. Boucher promised me on the floor that we would not delay it any further. So I know that's your concern. I will, as he knows, will remind him of those statements that, oh, and there he is, perfect timing, walking in the door. Mr. Boucher, I was just saying how on the debate on the floor, you were pretty strong about committing not to delay this you would do all in your power not to delay this anymore. So I was just relating that story, and in hopes that that will be your continued position.
Would the gentleman yield?
I would be honored to yield.
You have an excellent memory.
And without notes from my staff, that's even better. I want to ask for unanimous consent for a statement submitted by Qualcomm to be submitted in the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
And it just points out, and Mr. Dingell's here, and I've heard him numerous times talk about the takings provisions of the Constitution. And one of the reasons I had real problems with this legislation is because of the spectrum auction, a promise of a good paid for, and then was taken away because of the delay. The fully use of the 700 megahertz spectrum was not used as initially negotiated. And I think the letter highlights that there was some harm done by pushing this back. And that's what the letter actually highlights. This question for the entire panel: we originally wanted to provide coupons just to exclusively over-the-air homes, the ones that were actually at risk for losing service. We made paid television households eligible at the insistence of my friends on the other side, and about half the money ended up being spent on those homes. In hindsight, should we have stuck to our guns and focused only on over-the-air homes? Should we do so now to make sure we don't have to delay again? Mr. Wood?
That's hard for me to answer. I think that is...
we love putting people in hard-to-answer questions. That's part of our job here.
I will tell you that a substantial proportion of our audience is over the air, that a greater proportion of our audience than households at large are over-the-air households, that has been an obstacle for Hispanic households in the transition. But as to who the coupons go to, which houses, I think that's a policy matter.
That's fine. Mr. Severson?
Feel very similarly that we're here to take care of the customers, and in this case, you have helped determine who those customers are.
Okay. Mr. Shapiro?
I know Chairman Boucher is concerned about, as we all are, about the number of boxes that will be left in those final days, and that's a very difficult decision for retailers to make an investment in a product which has a very limited life. It's kind of like food that spoils. And manufacturers also making that manufacturing investment decision. So we've done a lot of work to try to research as to what that number will be, and we came up with an estimate that we think is good, and we think there's enough boxes out there. But as we've suggested before, if it comes right down to it, if it comes down to the end and there are not enough boxes available, or there's not enough funding in the program, or whatever it is, there are other alternatives that I think policymakers should consider. One is to have those coupons available and to be used for basic cable service, or for satellite, or for an upper-end box, or even for a stripped-down TV set. In terms of allocating them, obviously if it comes down to the end and there's just not enough money in a program or not enough boxes, that would be a logical triage for policymakers to face, but I'm sure the NTI people will be looking to you for guidance.
Mr. Morrow?
I think in the perfect world, and we don't live in a perfect world, yes, everyone should get a coupon, but clearly it makes sense in a world where we don't have unlimited resources, that putting a priority on those homes that are exclusively over the air kind of makes sense.
Mr. Lloyd?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to put a priority on over-the-air households, but I would say I don't think over-the-air households and free and paid TV are fixed numbers, that there are people who have paid TV who want to be over the air, and if they're locked in and you don't have the opportunity to get to them, they're not going to make the switch.
And Mr. Prather?
First of all, I think everybody in this room will agree that digital television is a superior product to what analog is. So I think everybody in America is going to be getting a better product, and I definitely think over-the-air ought to be a priority. I think if you can afford cable, you can afford to, if you need to buy a box for one TV that's not hooked up to it. But I'm a big believer that television is very important to everybody in America. Virtually 100% of the people have them. And as I said, we're providing a superior product that much better than anybody's ever had in the history of television. So.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just end by saying I'm excited about the transition. I think the public needs competitive choices, and because of the things you just mentioned, Mr. Prather, now they really do. I've had people leave cable, I hate to say that to some of my friends, to go over the air. They no longer have that additional cost, and they have quality and a lot more channels than they had before. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Shimkus. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question, Mr. Shapiro. It was reported last year you accused congressional Democrats of fear-mongering, and I quote, there when we expressed concerns about whether this program was going to work and consumers were going to be properly treated. Did you ever make that comment?
Well, I'm happy to say that we contacted that reporter and asked where they got that from, that I was accusing the fearmongers of fearmongering, which were actually individuals in the private sector, specifically probably the Consumers Union.
So you never said it?
I definitely used the word fearmongering, but I wasn't referring to elected officials. I was referring to self-declared consumer representatives.
Okay. All right, that comforts me. Starting with Mr. Wood, and I'm going to go across the panel here because I'd like to hear all of your judgments and thoughts on this matter. And you got to do this in about 25 words or less because we don't have much time, but what is the biggest single problem that has to be addressed here? And what is the way of getting the greatest benefit to the consumers to be achieved by this committee, the Congress, and the regulatory agencies?
I think for the community we serve, the Hispanic households in America, I think they started out behind. I think a greater percent are over-the-air television viewers. They had further to go. Fewer of them were connected to start with. So as of today, we see on March 15th, Nielsen estimated that 6.1% of Hispanic households are not prepared, are not hooked up, which is 2.5% greater than the households as a whole in the United States.
What do we do about this?
The good news is that it's coming down. As of the original transition date, the number then was 7.
What do we do about this?
What we're going to do is we're going to continue to reach out and continue to bring down the number. We're going to introduce new phases of our campaign where we address the feedback we've gotten. Mr. Chairman, for example.
Do you have any advice for the committee as to what we should see is done about this?
Well, what we're going to focus on is antennas, the need to scan, exactly the things that Chairman Copps mentioned in the first panel. I think that the items that they've identified are the correct items. It's the same feedback we've gotten.
I've got to go to the next panel members. Mr. Severson?
Thank you. The biggest concern I have, the biggest challenge is that we've got to stop changing things. The customer's confused, and so we just need to stick to our guns, stick to the date, and start recommunicating things.
What's to be done about that?
I'm sorry?
What is to be done about that?
What is to be done? Make sure that we communicate on an ongoing basis that June 12th is the date and that customers understand that.
Regulatory agencies, as the FCC and the NTIA, what are they to do about that?
I think that the role that they're playing with us in terms of feeding us good information is exactly what we need because that allows us to determine future demand.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Shapiro?
I can't think of a more successful public education effort than the one that industry and government have worked on together for this one. I suspect that more people know about this transition than can name the present Vice President of the United States or the previous Vice President of the United States. It has succeeded. The challenge is one change is almost a buy, and it's very confusing. Our experience with the consumers is, and we've asked a lot, we've done research for years and years on this, is their awareness is very high, but now they're a little confused about the date because February's passed and analog's still there for some of them. So not change it.
What should the regulatory agency?
Well, I would say Congress should do no harm and not change again. The regulatory agencies are doing a great job. Finish out the program, declare victory, and move on. A year from now, we'll look back at this, and the rest of the world will look back and say the U.S. had the most successful transition in history. We've been the example for the world. Europe and Japan both screwed this up and had to start over.
Go to other members of the panel. Mr. Morrow?
Well, there have actually been some pretty good ideas coming down the line here. I would have to say the number one thing is continued investment in consumer education. That would be my number one. And of course, I can't give up on this fill-in translator issue also. Investment in that so that people that have had high quality over-the-air service will continue to get it after the transition.
Mr. Lloyd?
Congressman Dingell, I would just say it's extraordinarily important for this committee to continue the close oversight of what the agencies do and to ask directly whether or not they are making sure they're funding people who are on the ground to get to those hard-to-reach, vulnerable communities that the PSAs didn't get to. And again, making sure that there are people on the ground who are hearing from people and that they're getting the assistance that they need to get the service.
Thank you. Further.
Mr. Dingle, I think the FCC, and I think they've done a relatively good job of this, should take the same attitude that we took of one viewer at a time and just, have phone banks and make sure they've got people that are trained and educated to answer these questions. We found out that we had, out of 28 stations, we had roughly less than 10,000 phone calls. We answered every single one of them, and we spent from a minute to 45 minutes with people going through what they need to do. I'd say 80 or 90% of the questions were related to how do I turn this converter box on almost? How do I scan it? Probably the second was regarding the antenna issues going from VHF, UHF, those things. But I don't think we left a single person feeling like they hadn't gotten service. And like I said, we even went to people's homes where we really knew they had a problem or there was something issue that we couldn't solve over the phone. And I know the FCC can't go to people's homes, but I think the phone banks and just the education of the people they got answering the calls around the country can do the same thing that we've done. And I think most stations that are community-oriented like we are will also take that same approach because our viewers are our most important asset.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request for I yield the floor. I'm going to send a letter down to the NTIA and the FCC requesting certain information. I would ask unanimous consent that that letter be inserted in the record and that the record be kept open and receives a response to the FCC and the NTIA.
Without objection, and the record will remain open for other members to submit questions to our panel of witnesses and for those responses to be received. Anything further, Mr. Dingle? The question that I want to focus on relates to the level of assurance we have that we'll have a sufficient number of converter boxes available as we approach June the 12th. But before I turn to that question, let me say for what probably now is the at least 10th time that there shall be no further postponement of the DTV transition and no request for further postponements will be entertained by this subcommittee. Chairman Waxman has been equally demonstrative in expressing the same viewpoint from his vantage point as full committee chairman. So rest assured that there shall be no further postponement. Mr. Shapiro and Mr. Severson, my questions are going to be primarily directed to the two of you, but other panel members are welcome to comment as you desire. I'm concerned about whether or not we're going to have adequate converter boxes available, and I'm just looking at a series of numbers that don't seem to match. As of yesterday, in the report that we got from NTIA, there were almost 9.3 million coupons that had been issued but not redeemed. These are active coupons in circulation. The current conversion rate, the redemption rate that we have for coupons redeemed for converter boxes is right at 60%. And assuming that that rate is experienced from now until June, we could certainly anticipate that as many as 5.5 million boxes would be necessary just to meet the 60% conversion rate on the more than 9.2 million coupons currently outstanding. And that number doesn't take into account the fact that as of yesterday, NTIA was getting more than 100,000 new requests for coupons every day. In fact, yesterday's number was 140,000. And we have seen the numbers continue to climb just over the course of the last week. It went from 91,000 on Tuesday to 140,000 yesterday, and we've seen an upward curve, a consistent upward curve over the last month. That may continue. And obviously, many of those coupons, let's assume 60%, are going to be redeemed for converter boxes. Also unaccounted for in these numbers are the converter boxes that people simply buy with their own money and don't use coupons in order to purchase. I heard one witness earlier today suggest, I believe, Mr. Severson, it might have been you, that about 90 or 95% of your converter boxes are coupon supported, but you've got some significant number, 5 to 10%, that are not. So that's even more. And so, Mr. Shapiro, I'm a little concerned about your estimate of only 4.2 million total boxes being needed from April until June the 12th. It doesn't seem to square with these numbers. And rather than just quarrel about those numbers, let me ask what perhaps is a better question. You can respond to all of this at once. To what extent is there close coordination from NTIA to the retailers to the manufacturers of information about coupon requests, coupon redemptions, so that some realistic projections can actually be made by the manufacturers based upon good estimates of what future demand will be? And if the answer to that question is right, then your 4.2 million figure gives me less concern. I mean, if there really is good flow of information and we can have some confidence that manufacturers really are going to respond very quickly, and I think you used the word nimbly before, in order to meet whatever the demand really is. So it's a long question. This is what concerns me the most about the transition from this point forward. So Mr. Severson, Mr. Shapiro, whoever wants to begin.
I'll answer from a Walmart perspective, and then Mr. Shapiro could answer from an industry perspective. As I stated before, the information that we get on a weekly basis from the NTIA is invaluable. We get information in terms of totals, but also by zip code, so that we can break those down, look at the redemption rate, look at our market share of that product. That allows us to not only understand where we should be sending product, because it has to be distributed throughout the United States, but also allows us to understand the trend of the coupons and the redemption rates and things like that. So we analyze that data on a weekly basis by store. Over 4,500, our systems allow us to look at that and make those determinations and determine, do we have enough product coming? Rest assured, there's always product in the pipeline. And then when do we need to go out and order more product to be able to manufacture and have product on hand for the month and a half to 2 months from now that we're going to need that product.
How nimbly do these manufacturers respond to your information suggesting that you're going to have an increased demand?
Sure. So we work with two suppliers specifically that we partnered with a year and a half ago to determine these are folks that we do a lot of business with. They're ones that are going to work very closely with us. They're in it for the long haul, not just for a transactional basis. They're going to make sure that they build a quality product and be able to deliver it on time. So we feel fairly confident as we work with them on an ongoing basis to talk about the supply and also the parts that are needed and the timing. We're in the business of taking care of our customers. That's what we do. And so we're reacting to our customer and how they're looking to be served on this so that we can take care of them.
And the manufacturers are responding appropriately as you tell them you need new boxes?
We are their customer, and they're responding to us. So, yeah, we're...
So the answer is yes?
Yes. Yeah.
Are you worried? Are you worried that there will not be enough boxes to meet the demand?
No. My biggest concern is that I will end up with too many boxes at the end, and the demand goes away, and then I've got nothing to do with that product.
Well, you obviously have to, account for inventory and be
Absolutely.
Sure that you don't oversupply.
Sure.
Mr. Shapiro, where did you get your 4.2 million number, and are you persuaded based on what you've heard today that maybe a higher number will be required?
The flow of information from NTI is very good. I'm persuaded that the number will change along the way. It'll go up or down. What we did is we've talked to...
Well, just based on their currently outstanding coupons.
Well, I'm not aware of the last 2
current
days.
redemption rate.
But
I'm sorry, what?
We use a 65% rate rather than a 60% rate.
That's
in
even
terms
higher.
Of redemption. You might have gone a little further out in time than we did, so maybe that balances out, and you also have more recent data than we were using. But what we did is we went out, major manufacturers, major retailers, and they're very cooperative with us for the most part. We don't get everybody, but we get most of them on both sides. And we know that at least 4 manufacturers are still making these boxes today. And they're responding
to people like Mr. Severson next to me immediately, and they're monitoring this. So it is a marketplace, and we're very mindful of the antitrust laws. We have considered going out with direct questions, perhaps with your signature or someone else's like you would be very helpful in terms of trying to gather actual data for what they're planning if you're that concerned in terms of getting the precise number. But it's the balance that every store is facing the same one. Do you order too much or do you order too little? They hate to say, send a customer elsewhere, but they don't want to get stuck with inventory which has no value. We're already starting to see scores of these things on eBay and Amazon at under the $40 coupon value. There isn't a secondary market developing. The free market's a wonderful thing. So in terms of where we end up, the number is certain to change, but that's a good thing. And we expect there will be spot shortages, and there may even be occasionally a minor locality or geographic shortage. But sophisticated retailers are always moving around and responding to the situation.
My concern about your number is that the manufacturers may look to you, being here, being close to the situation, following it through your trade association every day, talking to NTIA on a regular basis, for advice as to the number of boxes they ought to manufacture. And if 4.2 million becomes the benchmark, we're going to fall short. We will fall short even based on the outstanding coupons that exist today, much less the ones that are going to be requested in the future. And so I am concerned about that. I welcome your suggestion that perhaps there is a role we can play through making appropriate inquiries to manufacturers and or retailers, perhaps in the course of our letters asking questions containing the projections that we see just based on the numbers presented, and suggesting that a higher number of boxes may be necessary. And if you would care to interact with us informally afterwards and make more concrete suggestions about what might be constructive in that respect, we would welcome it. But I hope that as your manufacturers are talking with you, that you're giving them some very clear guidance about this and sharing NTIA's current numbers so that they actually have the benefit of that also.
There's one thing that concerns an association. It's the antitrust laws, and we don't give guidance. We try to
you can share
indicate the
information.
facts.
You can share information.
We were happy to share information and consistent with the law. The $140,000 unit a day request for coupons, if that continues, the numbers will go up rapidly. But the normalized rate that we were using was 70,000 coupons a day.
It's higher today. Mr. Prather?
Chairman Boucher, I may try to relieve your mind a little bit, and I know
I would appreciate that.
We hadn't got into the big cities yet, but in our markets, which is DMA 58 to 188, to give you an example, in Omaha, market 75, we had a little over 600 calls. We had 33 calls asking about coupons. In Lincoln, which is market 101, we had 1,016 calls. We had 2 calls asking about coupons. And in Augusta, Georgia, which has a heavy minority, both black, Spanish, and Chinese, we had 3,000 calls there, but it was 90% related to how do I turn the box on? I mean, literally, how do I scan it? Yeah. We had less than 50 calls there about coupons. So in our markets, and I'm saying I'm not speaking for New York City and Chicago and Detroit and all these other places, but it didn't seem to be very much of an issue at all in our markets.
Well, thank you.
If they didn't have a coupon and couldn't get it, you'd think they'd have been calling word.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Prather. That's not the problem I'm really addressing. It's not the situation about box availability today, which is adequate. It's the situation about box availability in May, when we may find that we have a shortage. And we're not going to postpone this transition again. So we need to get it right. And this is why we're having the hearing today, to figure out what needs to be done to make sure we don't have future problems. Anyone else want to comment on this? Mr. Spear.
Could I just say, Mr. Bell, I don't know if you were in the room when I suggested this earlier, but the backup plan that I would suggest is that if there are not enough boxes available, that the government, in a big sense, be ready to declare such and allow those coupons to be used for converter boxes which are not eligible, higher end, cable service, satellite, or even lower-end HD TVs as a backup. But the danger in even talking about that is then you'll have all these people who want coupons on the basis, and maybe that'll occur. So it is a little bit of a catch-22, but that is the safety valve that is possible.
To be taken under advisement. I had sketched out a question here about what is being done in order to help people who are having problems with antennas once they install their converter boxes, and I suspect everyone here who's on the front line of offering assistance is experiencing requests for that. But I think you've answered those questions in response to questions posed by other members. And it's also been quite a long day, and you have been most patient in staying with us through a long break while we had votes on the floor. So I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
This has been an extraordinarily helpful session today. Both panels have been superb in their testimony and have enlightened us. And we probably will be sending some additional questions to you as other members of the subcommittee submit their questions. When those arrive, please respond as quickly as you can. So with thanks to both panels of witnesses, oh, and I'm supposed to put this in the record. Mr. Shimkus, it's gone. Well, I'm the only one who gets to object, and I don't, I don't intend to. Well, so unanimous consent is granted to place in the record the statement of Mr. Bill Stone, Senior Vice President of Qualcomm, regarding the digital television transition, also the statement of the Community Broadcasters Association. Yes? All right. No one's objecting. So without objection. And thank you so much for your presentations today. With that, the hearing stands adjourned.
Okay.
Very good job.
It's great to meet you.
Nice to meet
Yeah.
you. Boy, amazing who you'll run into and who they've run into.
That's
over the
right.
years.
That's right. Yeah, it's a small community. Okay. Hour late.
Okay. But I don't think that the actual RFP is up yet. Like I've looked at the web and saw how many were online. Are you going back to Crystal City?
No, because I've got another meeting.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't know whether Peter.
You did a good job.
You're going to. Yeah. So.
Are you guys from back? Yeah. I mean, right now, it seems like all that's out there is that. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, or I mean, I might be able to, I might be able to see. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know that we ordered.
Yes. I hope I
Yes, Ms. Nye, from Madisonville.